How's everybody doing? You guys good? Awesome. Hey, ladies, real quick for you, we have something coming up on November 30th. That's a Thursday night at 6 o'clock where we've got an event we're just calling More. So women, if you've wanted more with your relationship with Jesus, if you wanted to connect with more with other women in our church, be here that Thursday night where we're gonna look at different things when it comes to spiritual habits, specifically like what's Bible engagement look like, what's prayer and worship, like how do I do those things? And the goal at the end of that night is not only do you connect with other women in our church, but you've got at least one step for you personally, one spiritual habit for you that you know what that step is and how can I grow my relationship by practicing this spiritual habit. So, man, this has been being planned for the last couple of months. This is going to be led by some rock star women in our church. So I would encourage you, make time Thursday, November 30th, the week after Thanksgiving, be here at 6 o'clock. And then let me transition over to what we're doing today because it kind of ties together a little bit. When it comes to my family, I like to think that I'm funny. I can't tell what that laughter is actually for. Probably what my wife and kids would do. They would roll their eyes when I say that, but that's never gonna stop me from trying to make jokes whenever I possibly can. So a little while ago, Kelly and I were on a big group text with a bunch of friends, and we were trying to figure out something to do on a Friday night where we could all just get together and hang out. People are throwing out back and forth different ideas of what we're gonna do, and then finally we agree on something that we're gonna do, and everybody starts responding and saying, yeah, we're in, and we're in. And Kelly responded the same way. She texts everybody back and says, the Hessels are in. And I saw that as an opportunity for me to make a really lame joke. So as soon as she responded to that and said that we were in, I responded to the group and said, unless we get a better offer. I thought it was funny. I know a couple guys in the group that are in this room right now. They laughed too. I knew Kelly would roll her eyes at that. But I was thinking about that text this week, and as lame as it was, it kind of struck me that we actually operate in that mode a lot in life, where we're looking for a better offer. I mean, just think about that. In all different areas of life, sometimes that makes sense to look for a better offer. Like, let me give you a great example. Cell phone contracts. How many of you can actually tell the difference in coverage between AT&T and Verizon? You can't. You can't tell the difference. If you want to argue with me on it, I'll give it to you. I'm not going to argue that. But 99% of us cannot tell the difference in coverage. So then how do we make our decision based on provider? It's not based on the service. It's based on the terms of the contract. Like, what provider is going to give me the best deal? Which provider is going to give me the best features at the lowest price? Like right now, my family's doing the family plan with Verizon, and I kid you not, there are 10 of my family members on this plan. Like, we're trying to get the best rate that we possibly can. Or maybe we look for terms that actually gives you no penalty if you get out of the contract. Now, you've seen this before too, right? When one provider will actually do a promotion where they will buy you out of your current contract with another provider so that you'll sign with them. Like, we're looking for the best offer possible, best features at the best price, and as soon as we see a better offer, we're out. I mean, how many things in life do we operate on a best offer basis? Cell phones, independent contractors, satellite or streaming TV, lawn care services, home security systems, medical providers. I mean, you can add almost anything you want to that list. We live in a best offer world where we make most of our decisions based on a consumer contract, whether that's an actual contract or it's in our heads. And as soon as something doesn't live up to those terms or doesn't satisfy us in the way that we want to, we're out. We're looking for something else. Now again, sometimes in life that makes sense. That can actually be wise and prudent. But my question is, have we taken this approach, this best offer, consumeristic approach, have we applied that approach to the way we operate with relationships too, especially marriage? A couple weeks ago, we started this series, For Better or Worse, and we're looking at how God designed marriage to be, because no matter what your marital status is right now, and we have a massive spectrum of situations in our church. Maybe you're single, or maybe you're engaged, or you are married, or maybe you're divorced. Maybe you've lost your spouse. Maybe you want to be married one day. Maybe you want nothing to do with marriage. No matter what your marital status is, it impacts you. Either you are married, or you will be one day, or you were once, or you're around people that are married. Marriage impacts you. And some of the principles that God has instituted and designed for marriage can actually then be applied to other areas and other relationships that you have, whether it's friendships or family members or teammates or neighbors. Treat your neighbors like a husband or wife, but some of the principles that go into marriage, they apply. So no matter what your marital status is, this series is actually for you. And today is even more proof of that because we all live in this best offer culture where we're taking a consumeristic approach to most things in life, where we're looking to consume something that satisfies us, and as soon as it doesn't satisfy us or it doesn't live up to the terms that we're looking for, we're out. And relationships have gotten to that point too. The accepted belief on relationships today, whether this is spoken openly or maybe it's just something that we caught on to by what's practiced around us, the accepted belief about what relationships are is consumeristic in nature. And why would they not be? I mean, if we live in a culture that says you can be your own God, that's exactly what we're promoting when we say you do you, or live your truth, or whatever feels right, feels good, feels true to you, do that. When we say those things, when we elevate self-actualization above everything else, of course we're gonna have a consumeristic culture. Consume whatever feels good to you. Consume whatever validates whatever you want validated. Of course we're gonna do that if we say you can be your own God. And then think about it at the material level. Everything is built on transactions, consuming goods and services. All of this creates this massive consumeristic culture that we live in. So of course we're gonna apply that to relationships, including marriage. We hit on this 2 weeks ago. That when we talk about marriage today in our world, the purpose, at least that our world believes marriage is, the purpose for marriage is to make you happy. If you boil it down, that's what our world will tell you. Marriage is meant to make you happy. Now, happiness is a great thing, and happiness can absolutely happen in a marriage. For the record, I'm extremely happy in my marriage. Please tell Kelly I said that, okay? Just don't want to get that out there. Yeah, you can absolutely be happy in marriage, but it's a terrible purpose and it's a futile pursuit. The reason why is happiness is always fleeting. And happiness is based on your circumstances. Your circumstances are constantly changing, and a lot of your circumstances you can't control. Yeah, you can be happy for sure, but that's not the purpose. Because there's gonna be times where you don't like each other. I said this 2 weeks ago, and I got some gasps in here that there are times where Kelly doesn't like me, or that I haven't liked her. Love is unconditional. Unconditional. Every single day we choose to love each other. But there's days where we just don't like each other. And the reason I said that is because, let's just be real, that's how everybody is. We're both broken and flawed people, just like you're broken and flawed. So there's days where you just might not like your spouse. Love is a whole different story. But if you buy into this, marriage is supposed to make you happy, and you're not happy, maybe it's just because you don't like your spouse that particular day. They're having a rough day and you guys are just kind of butting heads. If you're not happy, then the world will tell you, you know what, go find somebody else. Go look for a better offer. I mean, everything has become so transactional around us, where we look at someone or something and think, does this person fulfill the needs I want them to fulfill? Or do they satisfy me in the way that I want them to satisfy me? Do they make me happy? Because of that, we're absolutely gonna look at marriage like it's a consumer relationship. In a consumer relationship, my needs are more important than the other person's needs, and it's more important than the relationship itself. In a consumer relationship, eventually they fall apart. There's a pastor named Tim Keller, and I think he nails this. Here's what he says about relationships today. He says, today, we stay connected to people only as long as they take care of meeting our particular needs at an acceptable cost to us. When we cease to make a profit, that is, when the relationship appears to require more love from us and affirmation from us than we're getting back, then we just cut our losses and we drop the relationship. I think that's spot on with what's happening around the world, especially in American or Western context. I think that's exactly how we approach relationships, even marriages. So here's how a consumer relationship, here's how a consumer marriage plays out. The relationship will last only as long as the vendor is meeting whatever particular need you have at a price that's acceptable to you. Vendor, meaning your spouse, If they're satisfying you, if they're meeting whatever your needs are, and the cost is acceptable to you, you're willing to pay this particular cost, it's not too much, then the marriage is fine. It'll work. But as soon as that doesn't happen, as soon as they're not meeting whatever need that you have, as soon as they're not making you happy the way you want to be happy, as soon as the cost is too much or more than you're willing to pay, the marriage will start to crumble. That's unnerving and that's exhausting. I mean, just think about how this will actually play out, what has to happen. In a consumer relationship, you have to constantly be self-promoting and marketing yourself in order to create enough demand for your own worth. That's how the world works. If we adopt the world's models, that's what relationships look like. So now I've got to make more money. Maybe it's that. I got to make more money to make me even more appealing to my spouse, that I'm worth it. Or maybe I got to really work on my looks so that they're really attracted to that. I got to not just say I have a gym membership, but I actually have to go to it. I got to create this demand with something so that I'm worth it. That's what a consumer relationship looks like, because that's what the world looks like. And whether we realize it or not, we've adopted that. Let me market myself. Let me promote myself. I've got to be working at that exhaustively, because if it doesn't happen, then my spouse, they might walk, because I'm not living up to whatever the terms are. There's got to be something better. Because I think by and large, we would all look across the landscape right now when it comes to marriage. I think we would look across the landscape and say, something's off. Why is there so much deconstruction about something that's been around since man has been around? God started marriage in Genesis 2. It's been here as long as we've been here and been working, but now we're just starting to deconstruct it or saying there's different options, these different ways. But when we look around, we just see pain when it comes to marriage or falling apart. Every single person in here knows someone who's either been divorced or is divorced, or someone who's been abused, or someone who's been cheated on, someone who's been abandoned. That might be your story. In fact, I guarantee that's multiple people in this room right now. That's your story, or you've experienced that. That's part of your story. And I guarantee 100% of us in here know someone that's experienced something like that. Those are just some examples. There's got to be something better. Great news is, there is. There's something so much better when it comes to marriage, so much better than a consumer relationship. And surprise, surprise, it's the way God designed marriage. Marriage is meant to be a covenant relationship, not a consumer one. Meaning, it is the sacrificial commitment to the good of the other person. The essence of marriage, the way God designed it, is I'm going to lower myself and put my wife ahead of me. Her needs are now more important than mine. Her needs take precedent over mine. In a covenant marriage, I'm sacrificing myself for the good of her. Now that's the way God designed marriage. In a covenant relationship, in a covenant marriage, there's actually security to be vulnerable, where you can be fully known. Because everybody wants to be fully known. Everybody actually does want to be vulnerable and feel like they're safe enough to do that, because that's where real intimacy comes from. In a covenant marriage, you don't have to keep up facades. You don't have to keep selling yourself. It's a huge difference from the world around us. So biblical marriage at its core is the sacrificial commitment for the good of your spouse, which means love is more action than emotion. Now, emotions are real. Feelings are great. Everybody wants those great feelings for their spouse. That's awesome. But feelings change. That's why they're horrible to build on. They change. And sometimes they change from one moment to the next. How many of you have ever wondered about your spouse? Who are you? Because you're completely different than you were 10 minutes ago. What happened? Don't act like that hasn't happened with you, right? That's all of us, right? That happens. Feelings change. Feelings can be a great byproduct of healthy things in a marriage, but they're horrible building material. Instead, what's really cool is that biblical marriage takes promise and takes passion and combines them together. The passion is the feeling part, the good feelings that we all want. The promise is the covenant part. Biblical marriage puts those two things together. And the way it does that is through commitment. Like, commitment is when my focus is on what I do, not only to make the marriage last, but actually so that my marriage thrives and grows. That's what commitment does. A consumer relationship focuses on your spouse's role and what they're supposed to do to satisfy you however you want to be satisfied. Two very, very different things. One is they must do this, that's consuming. Covenant is I must do this. Totally different. Ephesians 5, 31 and 32 are the two verses that we're kind of circling around in this series and pulling different things out of. Here's what they say. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, not live in his parents' basement until he's 35, leave his father and mother, and hold fast to his wife. And the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound. So hold fast. That's commitment. The Greek word right there for hold fast, it means to glue together. So commitment is glue. I don't know if you've ever stopped to think about glue, but it's actually pretty cool. There's different kinds of glue for different kinds of materials. I just read about a super glue that actually set a world record for lifting a 5-ton car with only 9 drops of the glue. Like, that's crazy, is it not? That's an incredibly strong glue. And if you think about the science behind that, how does that actually happen? Boiling down the science of glue, it's simply an adhesive that creates an incredible bond between two objects. That's exactly what commitment is supposed to do. Create an incredible bond between two objects. But for some reason, that just doesn't seem to be the trend with marriage anymore. At least not today. Now maybe that's partly because we view it as a consumer relationship, right? Maybe it's because that you're told all the time that marriage is meant to be about you. You're told that, I'm told that. But here's the thing, if you want to have an incredible bond with your spouse, which that's where real intimacy comes from, the real intimacy, the vulnerability that you're actually looking for comes from this incredible bond. If you want to have an incredible bond with your spouse, you cannot be focused on yourself. You have to be focused on your spouse. Something that's focused on itself can never bond with something else, whether it's an object or whether it's two people. This is true with friendships too. If you want to have an incredible friendship with someone else, you can't be focused on yourself. You got to be focused on the other person. Well, Ephesians 5 actually kind of gives some of the things that make up this glue, that make up this commitment. Verse 1 and 2 says this, therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. So imitate God as Jesus loved us. Well, how did Jesus love us? He loved us by giving himself up for us, which that's the ultimate expression of love, to give yourself up for someone else. And really, that's the standard of love. And just think about that. If you're willing to die for somebody else, if you willingly die for someone else, then putting them ahead of you or serving them in any other way that they need to be served, that almost becomes easy if you're willing to die for them. I can say this till I'm blue in the face, man, I would lay down in traffic for my wife, but the way I prove that is not actually going and doing it on 66. The way I actually prove that is by putting her ahead of me and serving her in any way that she needs or wants to be served. That's proving it. To willingly die. So giving yourself up for your spouse, that's the beginning of commitment. Now, there's gonna be days where you don't give yourself up for your spouse. That's gonna happen, because all of us are flawed. If you ask Kelly right now, hey, has Matt given himself up for you every single day of your marriage? She's probably gonna laugh. She is. But here's what I hope. What I hope she would say is that even though he fails at this at times because he thinks of himself first, which I do, he's gotten better at this. And there are more days where he gives himself up for me than days that he does not. There's been progress because he's committed to practicing commitment. That's the key. Commit to practicing commitment. Commit to giving yourself up for your spouse daily. Now, that doesn't mean that you cease to exist as an individual. Not at all. It means you cease to exist for you as an individual. Now you're for somebody else, not yourself first. This is how the glue gets stronger. This is how you hold fast. Commit to practicing commitment. Now, the opposite of this is also true. If you break commitment, that will weaken the strength of commitment going forward. It makes it harder. Well, let's just say I've got 2 blocks of wood and I glue them together. And then I rip those two pieces of wood apart. Well, there's gonna be residue on both boards, right? There's gonna be glue that cured and is left over on those boards. Now, if I take a new piece of wood and I try to glue it to one of the original ones, there's a layer of already cured glue there that can't allow those two pieces of wood to bond as strong as they normally would. I can certainly still glue them together and they can join together as one, but it's gonna make it harder because there's a layer of glue in between them. When we break commitments, that is that layer of glue that goes between two boards. It just makes it harder going forward. There's a reason why that people who have been divorced have a significantly higher chance of getting divorced again. That's not guaranteed. And if that's your story, it's not a guarantee. Like some of you, if you've been divorced, wasn't your decision. You're not the one that broke the commitment, your spouse did. Maybe it was an affair, or maybe they abused you, or maybe they just walked out on you. You're not the one that broke the commitment. But the point is, if we keep breaking commitments in one area of life makes it easier to do it in another. That's all that means. So think about that. If you keep commitments in one area of your life, that actually will strengthen commitments in other areas of your lives. And if you break commitment over here, that'll actually make it easier for you to do the same thing over here. And this is one of the reasons why we talk to our kids all the time about, hey, we don't quit. We don't quit at anything. Whether it's, hey, we signed up to be on a flag football team or play basketball or soccer, or we decided to cut our neighbor's grass or or shovel their driveway, or I committed to helping this person. Whatever we make a commitment to, we don't quit. There is no quitting. Number one, that builds resilience and character in them. But what Kelly and I want to do is we want to build that muscle in them right now that we keep our commitments, because that will strengthen commitments they make later in life, where quitting's not an option. Something else that we've done is from the get-go. We made this agreement, this commitment when we were in premarital counseling while we were engaged. Kelly and I just told each other, we're taking the divorce word off the table. Divorce is not an option. We're not even gonna mention it. Now again, hear me, if you've been divorced, man, this is not an indictment on you. And I don't know what your story is or your situation is. And again, I know a lot of people in this room right now that they were divorced and it wasn't their doing. Everybody's got a role in a marriage for sure, but you're not the one that broke the commitment. You're not the one that cheated. You're not the one that abused. You're not the one that walked out. Maybe you heard Justin and Trisha's story last week and you tried that too. You tried to reconcile. You tried to give a second chance. You went to counseling, but your spouse just didn't want anything to do with it. That's not on you. And maybe you have committed those things, but you're still married and you've confessed that and asked for forgiveness and you're working to get better. That's awesome. But just where we started in our marriage, we just said from the beginning, we're never gonna say divorce. It's not an option. And we wanted our kids to hear that too. Not only to provide them some security, but also to train that in them also. And it's never been an option. We don't even talk about it. We don't even joke about it. What's interesting is when we started this series, Kelly and I brought that back up and talked about how, hey, divorce isn't gonna happen. We don't even view that as an option. We didn't realize that both of our parents said the same thing. Like both of our parents made that commitment and told us as kids, and we didn't even know that until a couple weeks ago. And now Kelly's parents just celebrated their 50th anniversary, and my parents have been, I don't know how long they've been married. That's bad that I don't know that. It's like 47 years, something like that. So they've got almost 100 years of marriage between the two of them. They modeled it for us. So we want to model it for our kids. No matter where you're at, marital status, whether you're engaged, whether you're married right now, whether you've lost your spouse and you might get married again one day, whether you've been divorced and you're gonna get married again, or you are remarried, start now. Take divorce off the table. Now there's some situations that call for it. There's some situations that do. There's biblical grounds for it. But scripture's clear that God hates divorce. Not people who have been divorced, hear me on that, but hates divorce. Why does he hate it? Because it's ripping two things apart that have been put together, that God's joined together. Make that commitment to commit to practicing commitment. Take it off the table. Imitate Jesus, giving yourself up for your spouse, the starting point of commitment. And then Paul says something in verse 21 here that honestly might give us a little bit of an allergic reaction. This is right before he starts talking specifically to husbands and wives, and he says this to all of us. So no matter what your marital status is, he's talking to all of us. He says, and further, meaning not just give yourself up, and further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit, which has kind of become a four-letter word in our culture, has it not? Like maybe when you hear submit, you bristle up a little bit. Like, okay. Or maybe when you hear the word submit, that emboldens you. Both of those are the wrong reactions. And maybe the reason we have wrong reactions when it comes to submission is because either it's been abused or because we've got the wrong understanding of what it actually is. We see submission throughout Scripture, and submission in all different kinds of relationships. In fact, everyone is submitting to someone and something. This concept, this word for submission right here in Ephesians, it's the same thing that's used in Luke when it's referring to Jesus submitting to his parents, and then again when Jesus submits to the will of God the Father in Philippians 2. So if submission is good enough for Jesus, the Son of God submitted, and we're supposed to imitate Jesus, that means we're also supposed to imitate him in submission. This is not something that we have to do. This is something that we get to do. It's something we get to do. And submission in a marriage, in any relationship, but especially in a marriage, submission can never be forced and it cannot be demanded. If it is, it's not submission, it's coercion or abuse. It has to be done willingly. Willing submission is me lowering myself so I can put Kelly ahead of me. And she's doing the exact same thing. She's lowering herself to put me ahead of her. Mutual submission like that in a marriage, that makes all the roles that are baked into marriage work the way God intended to them. When we do that, when you put your spouse ahead of yourself, every time you do that, whether that's serving them, whether that's doing what's best for them, whether that's putting their needs in front of yours, every time you put your spouse ahead of you, not only does that strengthen the glue of the commitment, you're practicing holding fast and it makes it easier to do it every time. And maybe this sounds really simplistic that, oh yeah, commitment is the glue for a relationship. Thank you, Matt, that's really deep and profound. I get it. It sounds super simplistic, but we got to know the components of it. It's easy to talk about commitment, but what does that actually mean? That means you giving yourself up for your spouse. That's the starting point of commitment. And then submitting mutually to one another willingly, that makes that glue stronger and stronger and stronger. We got to know that. And at the same time, we also have to recognize things that can erode or threaten commitment, because there's all kinds of things that want to pick away at your commitment, whether that's viewing a marriage like it's terms, this consumeristic terms. We've got this contract in my mind that as long as my spouse lives up to these terms, as long as they're doing these things that I want them to do to satisfy me, and it's not costing me too much, we're good to go. But I've got this plan B just in case. Having a plan B perspective to marriage makes your marriage weak from the start, because you've given yourself an escape route. You've just put divorce or separation or abuse or walking out right on the table. That will chip away at the commitment. So will lack of intimacy. And I'm not just talking about sex. We'll actually talk about that next week. So if you have your kids in here right now, next week would be a great time to have them in the kids ministry, or you might have some awkward conversations on the car ride home. You feel awkward right now, right? Don't you? Now, intimacy is not just sex. At the core of it, intimacy is having the security to be completely vulnerable, fully known, and still loved. Now, you want that because you were wired for it. You were wired to be fully known, be fully vulnerable, and still loved. That's what's supposed to happen in marriage. Man, in Genesis 2, this verse that Ephesians 5 is quoting, that Jesus quotes in Matthew 19, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That's awesome. The very last verse of Genesis 2, the last verse before the fall and the whole world gets broken. It says, the man and woman were both naked and unashamed. As a teenager, I thought that verse was awesome. Now I understand, though, more what it means. To be naked and not ashamed means they're both completely vulnerable, fully known, and still loved. That's what intimacy does. Intimacy will strengthen if there's intimacy in your marriage, it will absolutely strengthen the commitment. The glue will get stronger and stronger and stronger. If there is not intimacy in your marriage, it will erode the commitment. So will lack of communication. It almost sounds cliche to talk about communication when you talk about marriage or a relationship, but it really is so vital. Like, communication is so important. And when there's a lack of communication, then usually assumption gets put in its place. And assumption is a terrible, terrible replacement. Like, whenever there's assumption, that usually puts the other person on the defensive. And if you feel like you have to play defense, then you don't feel like you have the security to be vulnerable. And if you're not being vulnerable, then intimacy isn't happening. And if intimacy isn't happening, the commitment starts to erode. That's what lack of communication can do in your marriage. So can unspoken expectations. This has been a source of conflict or tension for Kelly and I at different points, where we both have expectations about something. We don't talk to the other person about that expectation. So of course it doesn't get met because the other person didn't even know it existed. And now that's a source of conflict. This is easy to do. And talk about whatever expectations you have with your spouse on any given subject. Maybe it's expectation on how you're going to communicate. Or maybe it's expectations on how you're going to spend time together. Could be expectations about sex. Could be expectations about when you'll put up Christmas decorations. Some of you are already doing it. Stop. Like, you're just ruining it, okay? One person clapping, all right. Or maybe expectations about how you're going to split up time around the holidays for extended family. Anybody ever gotten in a fight in your marriage about that? Yes, you have. Don't lie. Like, that's been some of our worst tension, right? Or maybe you've got expectations about when you're going to hang out and date. Or maybe you've got expectations about how Sunday afternoons in the fall are specifically for football, right? Whatever your expectations are, talk to your spouse about them. Now, what's going to probably happen is you're going to realize that as you're talking about whatever expectation it is, maybe you've got some that are unfair or a little bit selfish. That's good. That comes out of talking about them. So then you can drop them. But if you don't even talk about them, you don't even realize that they might be selfish, and then you're going to be upset when your unmet selfish expectations aren't met. That's not good. Talk about what your expectations are. Because if you don't, it'll erode your commitment. It'll threaten it. So will undealt with conflict. Conflict is inevitable in any relationship, right? Marriage is included. But what matters most is how you deal with that conflict. You don't get to blow up at your spouse when there's conflict. And at the same time, you don't get to bury it either. Some of you are the blow up people, some of you are the bury people. Both are not good. You cannot let conflict just fester on. So deal with the conflict that you have. And maybe that means you need to get help. Maybe that's engaging a couple close friends that can help talk through this and work through it with you. Maybe it means you're getting counseling. And there's nothing wrong with that. Getting counseling is not weakness at all. In fact, I would say it's strength. To recognize that we have this conflict over here, we need to deal with it. I think we need a little bit of help dealing with it, so we go out and get that help. That shows strength and maturity, not weakness. Undealt with conflict is eventually going to come back to the surface, and it's going to cause more damage every single time. So can the way you pursue or don't pursue your spouse. Now, let me just say this. This might sound simplistic, but let's be clear on this. Pursuing your spouse doesn't stop when you say, I do. Well, Matt, I put a ring on it. I don't care. You still pursue. Pursuing your spouse is one of the things that can either strengthen or weaken the commitment in your relationship, whether you're doing it or not. Every single time. You're not responsible for the commitment level of your spouse, but you can reinforce it by pursuing them in a way that they want to be pursued. So, how does your spouse want to be pursued? How does your wife want to be pursued? How does your husband want to be pursued? Because it goes both ways. Man, talk about this. Date your spouse. We said this with our kids quite a bit is, hey, we're going on date night. And sometimes it's a little bit harder because the stage of life we're in with our kids, date night can be a little bit harder. But I like to tell my kids that, hey, your mom is also my girlfriend. And they get really weirded out by that at times, but she is. I want her to be my girlfriend. She started off as my girlfriend. Why'd that change when she became my wife? Because I pursued her hard when we were dating and those 7 years before I got her. But again, I got the ring, so it was worth it. Why would I stop after we say I do? Date your spouse. It'll strengthen the commitment. And then be friends. Be friends. That seems obvious, but man, a lot of people love to say, well, I married my best friend. That's super cute and romantic. Make sure there's truth to that statement. Like, are you guys really friends? Do things that friends do. Go do things that you like. Strengthen that friendship. Laugh with each other, laugh at each other. Like wives, laugh at your husbands. It's easy, we make it easy at times, especially when we're really funny, right? Laugh at your husbands. I would say it a little bit differently. Husbands, don't laugh at your wives. That usually it doesn't work out very well. You can try, I mean, that's a gamble. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's bad news. But like seriously, just be friends. That sounds so easy and so simple and like, well, okay. But seriously, be friends. And then most of all, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. Your ability to hold fast to your spouse will be directly connected to your personal relationship with Jesus. Pursue Jesus as an individual. Then pursue him together. I've told you this before, that my favorite time of the day is in the mornings on our front porch or at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee, with my Bible, and Kelly sitting right next to me doing the same thing. We might not even say a word to each other for 45 minutes, but the fact that she's chasing after Christ right next to me while I'm doing the same thing. Imagine a pyramid. Like the first time I ever heard this or saw this was when we were getting married, and I thought it was really cheesy when I first saw it, but it actually is really true. So at the very top of this pyramid is God. Jesus is God. So the top of the pyramid is Jesus. Then you and your spouse are at the bottom corners. As you both pursue him individually and get closer and grow closer to Christ, what happens to the two of you? You get closer. You get much, much closer. If you pursue Jesus first in your marriage, if both of you do, that is the number one way to turn your commitment into super glue that can lift a 5-ton car with just 9 drops, is if you're pursuing Christ. The best way for you to love your spouse is to love Jesus first. Your spouse will be the biggest beneficiary of that. And then your kids if you're a parent. Or if you're a grandparent, your grandkids will feel that too. The best way for you to love your spouse is to love Jesus first. Now we've got a staff value here that we say quite a bit. We just say go for the bronze. Our LifeBridge team, we're gonna go for the bronze, meaning Jesus gets the gold medal in our lives, our spouses and families get the silver medal, then LifeBridge as a job, as our staff position, that gets the bronze medal. We can never get those things out of order. Don't get those things out of order in your own personal life, in your marriage. Jesus gets the gold medal, your spouse gets the silver, everything else gets the bronze. If you pursue Jesus first, I promise you that super glue will get stronger and stronger and stronger. It doesn't mean commitment is ironclad, it can never be broken. But the more you pursue Jesus, the harder it is for that commitment to break. And the richer your marriage will be. The easier it'll be to pursue your spouse, the easier it'll be to date your spouse, the more you'll laugh together, the more you'll be friends, the easier it is to communicate and deal with conflict. Pursue Jesus first. That's how you strengthen the commitment in your marriage. Let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you for giving yourself up for us. And it's hard to do that. I'm a selfish person, so it's times it's really hard to give myself up for Kelly or other people, but I ask that you would just help us to do that. That you would give us the grace and the conviction and the strength and the faithfulness to give ourselves up like you gave yourself up for us. And then from that, would you just strengthen the marriages in this room, the marriages of people that are joining us online, our entire church. Would you just strengthen the marriages? For people that are in a good spot right now, would you bless them and continue to help them grow? For people that are engaged or single and want to be married one day, that you would just give them a godly husband, a godly wife, and that they would, from day one, they would pursue you. People that have lost their spouse in this room right now, that you would just bring healing and comfort and peace. People that have been divorced, would you bring healing and forgiveness and reconciliation? If there's something that needs to be confessed and asked for forgiveness for, that would happen, and repentance and reconciliation would happen. Just thank you for the example that we have. I pray that our marriages in this church and the future marriages that happen, would you create a generational cycle in our church of what marriages and families are supposed to look like? All the kids that are down in the kids area right now, and all of our students, would you let them have great godly marriages when they're older? And it's a reflection of what happens in this room, and us pursuing you first, and us trying to be committed in our own relationships, and us giving ourselves up for our spouse. Let us model that for our kids. Let us show them how to strengthen commitment in every area of their life. Give us the grace. Give us the grace to do that. We love you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.